Today on the Beta Files, we're going to start 2021 off with God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater, the case for Eliot Rosewater. So hang on to your diapies, babies. I'm the barber. This is the Beta Files.
Here's the BetaFiles podcast.
Okay. All right. So, I wanted to start the year off. I'm not going to deal with the Twitter mess and all that stuff. We'll talk about social media later. Probably do a short files about it. But I wanted to start off the first year, or the first episode of the year, doing what I was wanting to do back in October, and then of course lots of life happened. So here we are in January 2021. Yay! And if you haven't seen the promo yet, you really know how I feel about 2021. But I wanted to start off with a really cool podcast about a character that is one of my favorites. Just going down, ticking off the list. I did a podcast sometime in the fall, early fall, I think, around August or September, about Hester Prynne, and I noted that I wanted to do more like that. So this is another one of those. It's probably going to be a short one, about Eliot Rosewater. If you don't know who Eliot Rosewater is, he is the protagonist of the book God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater by Kurt Vonnegut. One of Vonnegut's the string of books that Vonnegut wrote in the 1960s that ultimately culminated in Slaughterhouse-Five. There's The Cat's Cradle, God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater. Mother Night comes out right shortly before both of those. And then I want to say Jailbird is in there somewhere, and then of course Slaughterhouse-Five, and then finally Breakfast of Champions is the last of that string of books that he wrote during the 1960s, late 50s, 1960s, and then on into the 70s, the early 70s. So it was a very productive period for Vonnegut during that time. And the novel, I'm not going to give you the whole story of God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater, but the novel really lays out an interesting story about a man who is very charitable. And one of the reasons why I love Eliot so much is his desire to provide as much as he can to the citizens of Rosewater, Illinois, which is a fictional town that Vonnegut makes up for the book. Eliot is the son of a sitting U.S. senator. They have a ton of money. They come from old money, the Rosewater line in the book. And Eliot is the heir to this massive fortune. Eliot's one of the things that happens to Eliot is he goes off to World War II. And he actually, what's interesting is in Slaughterhouse, you actually have a cameo of Eliot in the hospital with Billy Pilgrim. So you get to see Eliot there. And of course, there are recurring characters from other novels that pop up in and out of God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater, much like they do all his books. There's always this continuing theme of recurring characters. I'm sorry. I'm struggling to word all of a sudden. But anyway, so Eliot goes to war and he suffers a psychological setback because of World War II. And when he comes home, he decides that he's going to set up camp in Rosewater, Illinois, which is named after his family, and give back to the community. And it's a fascinating study in trying to figure out the difference between capitalism and borderline socialism with Eliot. And I'm actually going to read a couple pieces from the quintessential chapter of the entire book, and this is where you really get to see the depths of Eliot Rosewater and how his mind operates, how his mind works throughout this book. The thing that really trips him up in World War II is Eliot grows up idolizing firefighters, and he wants to be a firefighter. He wants to work in that line, right? He wants to do that, and he goes off to war. And in the incident that really just messes his head up, he comes in on what he thinks are a bunch of Nazi soldiers. He kills them all. He's part of a group that comes in and just wipes out these Nazi soldiers, or what he thinks are Nazi soldiers, and he finds out afterwards that they were actually firemen. They were firemen of the local village. And so he's obviously crushed. And it really messes with his head. And that's kind of where you see the shift, and he makes the decision that he's going to do what he can to help the community. Now, there are other things that happen throughout the novel that contribute to this decision to move to Rosewater, Illinois, and take up shop there. He actually puts his his little office for the charity, the Rosewater Foundation is what it's called, in the upstairs of the town's fire department. So he's right above the fire department, where he feels comfortable. And he does all these different things for different people around the town and around the Rosewater, Illinois. Now, of course, this really aggravates his father. His father, like I said, is a sitting senator. It puts a strain on Eliot's marriage. His wife doesn't understand what he's doing, and why he's doing what he's doing, but she stays married to him so she can get a piece of that fortune. So that's the setup. And so what I wanted to do was, like I said, I wanted to focus on this one chapter. This is the same chapter that I teach in American literature when I teach Rosewater. Because, like I said, it opens up a lot about who Eliot is and what really motivates him. Okay, so there are 3 phone calls in this chapter. Okay, the first phone call is from a man who is contemplating suicide, and so Eliot calls his bluff. He calls and he says, "Mr. Rosewater," said a fretful man, "you don't know me." And Eliot responds, "Did someone tell you that mattered?" He responds, "I'm nothing, Mr. Rosewater. I'm worse than nothing." And then Eliot says, "Then God made a pretty bad mistake, didn't he?" "He sure did when he made me." "Well, maybe you brought your complaint to the right place." "What kind of place is it, anyway? How'd you happen to hear of us?" "There's a big black and yellow sticker in the phone booth that says, 'Don't kill yourself. Call the Rosewater Foundation.' It's got your number." And he says, "You know what? Somebody's written right under it in pencil." And Eliot says, "No." He says, "Eliot Rosewater is a saint. He'll give you love and money. If you'd rather have the best piece of tail in southern Indiana, call Melissa." And it's got her number too. So then he goes through this little dance with the guy where he finally says, where Eliot says, "What can we do to help you?" The guy says, "Who the hell are you?" And Eliot says, "The government." The guy says, "The what?" He says, "The government. If I'm not a church and I still want to keep people from killing themselves, I must be the government, right?" The man muttered something. "Or the community chest," said Eliot. "Is this some kind of joke?" "That's for me to know and you to find out." Eliot responds. So he's having all this wonderful wordplay with this guy, and what you realize as you go through this, that he's learning the guy, he's learning the man, and he's trying to pinpoint exactly where this guy falls on the chart as far as how serious he is about suicide. So the guy says, maybe you think it's funny to put up signs about people who want to commit suicide. And Eliot asks, are you about to? So we get to the chase, and he says, what if I was? And Eliot responds, I wouldn't tell you the gorgeous reasons I have discovered for going on living. So the guy says, well, then what would you do? And Eliot responds, I'd ask you to name the rock bottom price you'd charge to go on living for one more week. There was silence. Did you hear me? Said Eliot. I heard you. If you're not going to kill yourself, would you please hang up? There are other people who'd like to use the line. You sound so crazy. You're the one who wants to kill himself. So Eliot, again, is just toying with this guy, and he's trying to get this guy to commit to help, right? And he's doing it in such a Vonnegut way. If you've never read Kurt Vonnegut, you need to read any of his novels. They're absolutely fantastic, and the way he deals with the human experience is phenomenal. So anyway, he says, what if I said, the guy, he says, what if I said I wouldn't live through the next week for $1 million? And Eliot responds, go ahead and die. Try 1,000. The guy says, okay, 1,000. And Eliot says, go ahead and die. Try 100. The guy says, okay, 100. And Eliot responds, now you're making sense. Come on over and talk. He told him where his office was. Don't be afraid of the dogs in the front of the firehouse, he said. They only bite when the fire alarm goes off. So this is one of those things where one of these moments in the novel where we see Eliot doing what he does best, which is coaxing people into getting help, right? And he has an odd way of doing it. And again, he's learning the people as he talks to them. And we're going to talk about the second phone call here in just a second, where he starts to learn this woman and learn what it is that she's actually looking for. So what he ends up doing is he talks to the guy. The guy comes in, he talks to him, he ends up giving him $300 and a book and sends the guy on his way. And the guy feels a little bit better about himself, and he doesn't want to commit suicide anymore. So it's all for decent, or, Eliot does what he's supposed to do. Then the second phone call. With Stella Wakeby. Eliot's black telephone rang. This is the Rosewater Foundation. How can we help you? Mr. Rosewater, said a woman chokingly. This is Stella Wakeby. She panted, waiting for his reaction to the announcement. Well, hello, said Eliot heartily. How nice to hear from you. What a pleasant surprise. He didn't know who Stella Wakeby was. Mr. Rosewater, I never asked you for anything, did I? No, you never did. Well, a lot of people, a lot less troubles than I got, bother you all the time. I never feel that anyone is bothering me. It is true, I do see some people more than others. Now, I've often thought of how, and then he says, and I've often thought of the awful burdens you must have to carry. So he's starting to throw the lines out there to see what kind of information he can draw from her so he can figure out how it is that he can help her. Again, it's all about trying to get her to let him help her. She's calling, just like the first guy was, because she recognizes she needs some kind of help. And Eliot knows that, so now he's got to figure out exactly what kind of help he can offer her. So she responds, oh, Mr. Rosewater, if you only knew. We always said we were Senator Rosewater people, not Eliot Rosewater people. And Eliot says they're there. So she's talking about Eliot's father, who we're going to meet in the third phone call. We've always stood on our own 2 feet no matter what. Many's the time I passed you out in the street and looked the other way, not on account of I had anything against you. I just wanted you to know the Wakebys were fine. And Eliot responds, I understood, and I was always glad to get the good news. Eliot couldn't recall any woman's turning her face away from him, and he walked around the town so rarely that he couldn't have offered the overwrought Stella very many opportunities to react to him. He supposed correctly that she lived in frightful poverty on some back road, rarely showing herself and her rags, and only imagining that she had some sort of life in the town too, and that everyone knew her. If she had passed Eliot on the street once, which she probably had, that once had become 1,000 passings in her mind, each with its own dramatic lights and shadows. This is one of the beauties of Vonnegut's writing, and being able to, again, harness the nature of humanity and the idiosyncrasies that we have as human beings and as Americans. So she goes on. She says, I couldn't sleep tonight, Mr. Rosewater, so I walked the road. Now he says, and many's the time you've done it. Again, he's just throwing fillers out there to see what kind of problems she is purported to have, so he can offer her the help that she's entitled to. Oh God, Mr. Rosewater, full moon, half moon, no moon at all. And tonight the rain. I like the rain, and so do I. There was this light in my neighbor's house. Thank God for neighbors, Eliot says. And I knocked on the door, and they took me in, and I said, I just can't go another step without some kind of help. If I can't get some kind of help, I don't care if tomorrow never comes. I can't be a Senator Rosewater person anymore. Now, again, we're setting up for this third phone call where you actually get to see Senator Rosewater, and you understand what it is she's complaining about. There, Eliot says. So they put me in a car, and they drove me to the nearest telephone. They said, you call up Eliot. He'll help. So that's what I've done. Would you like to come see me now, dear, or can you wait until tomorrow? Tomorrow. It was almost a question. Wonderful. Anytime's convenient for you, dear. Tomorrow. Tomorrow, dear. It's going to be a very nice day. Thank God. Oh, Mr. Rosewater, thank God for you. So in the second phone call, just like we saw in the first phone call, Eliot is able, he's still not 100% what the problem that she has is, but he knows it has something to do with her poverty. Because notice how Vonnegut kind of sets that up for you. And then as you're getting ready to find out, with the third phone call, the father doesn't really care about the impoverished, right? He doesn't understand the charity that that Eliot is trying to offer. So, but once again, he's got her coming in, so he's going to be able to help her in some way, shape, or form. He's going to be able to get her into a situation where she feels better about herself and about her prospects. So here we go with the third and most infamous of the phone calls. Eliot hung up. The telephone rang immediately. This is the Rosewater Foundation. How can we help you? You might start by getting a haircut and a new suit, said a man. What? Eliot? Yes? You don't even recognize my voice. I'm sorry. Well, it's your goddamn dad. So here we have his father, Senator Rosewater. Call him up, and we're going to find out what it is the father wants. Now, obviously, we've been set up by Vonnegut earlier in this chapter by these first two phone calls where Eliot is trying to fish out what these people's problems are so he can give them the help. Now he's going to start doing the same thing to his father, only he's not trying to get his father help. He's trying to figure out exactly what it is his father wants. So, we're going to skip ahead a little bit. And he says, Eliot, this is his father. Eliot responds, yes, sir. I want you to take a good look at yourself. Dutifully, Eliot looked himself over as best he could without a mirror. I'm looking. Now ask yourself, is this a dream? How did I ever get in such a disreputable condition? And again, dutifully, and without a trace of whimsicality, Eliot said to himself out loud, is this a dream? How did I ever get into such a disreputable condition? Well, what is your answer? Well, it isn't a dream, Eliot reported. Do you wish it were? What would I wake up to? What you can be, what you used to be. And so Eliot responds, you want me to start buying paintings for museums again? Would you be prouder of me if I contributed $2.5 million to buy Rembrandt's Aristotle contemplating a bust of Homer? Don't reduce the argument to an absurdity. I'm not the one who did that. Blame the people who put up that kind of money for that kind of picture. I showed a photograph of it to Diane Moon Glampers, and she said, maybe I'm dumb, Mr. Rosewater, but I wouldn't give that thing house room. Eliot? Yes, sir. Ask yourself what Harvard would think of you now. I don't have to, I already know. Oh? They're crazy about me. You should see the letters I get. The senator nodded to himself resignedly, knowing that the Harvard jibe was ill-considered, knowing Eliot told the truth when he spoke of letters from Harvard that were full of respect. After all, said Eliot, for goodness sakes, I've given those guys $300,000 a year regular as clockwork ever since the foundation began. You should see the letters. So then we get to the third question. Eliot? Yes, sir. We come to a supremely ironic moment in history, for Senator Rosewater of Indiana now asks his own son, are you or have you ever been a communist? And Eliot's answers to this, and the last quote of the chapter that we're going to focus on here in just a minute, tells you everything you need to know about Eliot's internal processings, okay? How he actually engages with life and why he's one of my favorite characters of all time. So Eliot responds to his father's question of whether he has or has ever been a communist by saying, oh, I have what a lot of people would probably call communistic thoughts, said Eliot artlessly. But for heaven's sakes, Father, nobody can work with the poor and not fall over Karl Marx from time to time, or fall over the Bible as far as that goes. So in one sentence, what Vonnegut does is he equates Marx and the Bible together. And why this is important is because if you look at the New Testament, most of the message of the Gospels and then, of course, the epistles after them is one of charity, right? And then if you look at the Old Testament, it is a narrative of the impoverished nation of Israel and how God starts to reward them for their poverty and reward them for their humbleness and reward them for the suffering that they go through. So when Eliot equates this to Marx, who is famous for, of course, going after the rich and pointing out how the proletariat is being put down by the rich, what Vonnegut is actually saying is that both ideas are based on humanity and the humane work of charity and how we should help each other, how we should reach out and help each other get through hard times, no matter what that hard time looks like, whether it's a monetary hard time or a psychological hard time or an emotional hard time, right? And so that's what Eliot is talking about here. So, of course, his father gets mad at him, which kind of riles up Eliot. And we start to see Eliot's more passionate side come out. And he brings up what he calls a money river. And he defines the money river as the money river, where the wealth of the nation flows. We were born on the banks of it, talking about he and his father. And so were most of the mediocre people who we grew up with, went to private schools with, sailed and played tennis with. We can slurp from that mighty river to our heart's content, and we even take slurping lessons so we can slurp more efficiently. Now, what he's talking about is old money, and how old money in the capitalist regime, old money carries clout, right? And so Eliot's saying we are born on the banks of this river where we have access to all the water. And we can touch that water anytime we want, and we can get as much of that water as we want. And we are even taught how to take the water from the river, okay? He goes on to say, after he and his father go back and forth, he says, if there isn't a money river, then how did I make $10,000 today just by snoozing and scratching myself and occasionally answering the phone? So, of course, he attacks his dad's way of life and, of course, his family's fortune. So his father says, is it still possible, or it's still possible for an American to make a fortune on his own? And Eliot responds, sure, provided somebody tells him when he's young enough that there is a money river, there's nothing fair about it, that he had damn well better forget about hard work and the merit system and honesty and all that crap and get and get to where the river is. Go where the rich and the powerful are, I'd tell him, and learn their ways. They can be flattered and they can be scared. please them enormously or scare them enormously. And one moonless night they will put their fingers to their lips, warning you not to make a sound, and they will lead you through the dark to the widest, deepest river of wealth ever known to man. You'll be shown your place on the riverbank and handed a bucket all your own. Slurp as much as you want, but try to keep the racket of your slurping down. A poor man might hear you. So Eliot is talking about the system of going through the back doors to get to the wealth, right? One of the reasons why I love this book is it's timeless, because throughout my life, I was born in the late 70s. Of course, I grew up during the 80s and 90s, and of course became moved into adulthood during the 2000s and 2010s. And during those times, during those periods, we've had periods of massive economic growth, and then we've had periods of massive economic downturns. And I'm brought back to this moment in here because with every economic downturn that we have, we see exactly who it was that got new access to the money river that Vonnegut talks about here. Because when the downturn happens, they don't get hurt. One of the things that the Hill has been reporting on since March, when COVID started and we started to see the shutdowns and the industrial shutdowns and all that, is that the billionaires have actually made money, lots of money since March, while the working class has been almost destroyed economically. And so that's what Vonnegut's talking about here. Those who survived this COVID, who've come out of this COVID mess with a fortune, were taught how to get to the river, shown their place on the riverbanks. Just throwing that out there. So his father gets fed up with him and gets off the phone. And the next person on the phone, and still this is the third phone call still, is his wife, Sylvia, who's wanting to divorce him. But of course she hasn't yet, because again, she wants part of that inheritance. She wants some of that fortune. So Sylvia gets on and says, Eliot. And Eliot says, Sylvia. She says, I am aware that I have behaved badly. As long as the behavior was human. Can I help being human? No. Can anybody? Not that I know of, Eliot says. Eliot? Yes. How is everybody? Here? Anywhere. They're fine. Well, I'm glad. It's her response. If I ask about certain people, I'll cry, said Sylvia. Then don't ask. I still care about them, even if the doctors tell me I mustn't ever go down there again. Well, then don't ask. Somebody had a baby? Don't ask. Didn't you tell your father somebody had a baby? Don't ask. Who had a baby, Eliot? I care. Oh, Christ, don't ask. I care. Okay, Mary Moody. Twins? Of course. Eliot revealed here that he had no illusion about the people to whom he was devoting his life. And firebugs, too, no doubt. The Moody family had a long history of not only twins, but arson. So he goes on. This is one of my favorite lines in the entire book. He goes on talking to her and he says, Vonnegut writes, Eliot took a drink of Southern comfort and was uncomforted. So she pushes him a little bit. She says, congratulate Mary Moody on her twins. And Eliot says, I will. I'll be baptizing them tomorrow. Baptizing? This was something new. I didn't know you did things like that, said Sylvia carefully. I couldn't get out of it, said Eliot. She insisted on it. Nobody else would do it. Oh, Sylvia relaxed. I told her, said Eliot, that I wasn't a religious person by any stretch of the imagination. I told her nothing I did would count in heaven, but she insisted just the same. And Sylvia asked, what will you say? And this is the part of the chapter that I've actually got this quote up in several different places, specifically on my door at my office. But Eliot says, I'll go over to her shack, I guess, sprinkle some water on the babies and say, Hello, babies. Welcome to Earth. It's hot in the summer and cold in the winter. It's round and wet and crowded. At the outside, babies, you've got about 100 years here. There's only one rule that I know of, babies. God damn it, you've got to be kind. Like I said, this is the quote, right, from the book, from the chapter. That, and of course, the quote about communism and the Bible. And what we're getting from this is Eliot's true nature, which is a nature that understands the value of just being kind, of kindness, something that his father is reluctant to engage with and reluctant to accept, because his father thinks that there's a structure, and that Eliot's at the top of that structure, top of the food chain. He doesn't understand why Eliot doesn't want to stay at the top of that food chain, and Eliot realizes that the food chain is bogus, that we need to help the people at the bottom so that we can rise them up and help them get what they need. And like I said, this isn't all monetary. This is also emotional and psychological. If you go through this book, Eliot does a lot of psychology, and he helps with a lot of emotional support as well. It's not all money until you get to the very end. And I will save that for you to read. So that is Eliot Rosewater. Eliot is, like I said, one of my favorite characters, mainly because he's blissful in his quote-unquote, as I noted, his quote-unquote status. He doesn't buy into it. He actually rejects it. And he sets up camp in this small town where he decides that he wants to help them no matter what. He's going to do everything he can to help the community, community be a better community. And so that's Eliot Rosewater, and that's why he is one of my favorite characters and probably one of the greatest characters ever written. But like I said, you've got to be kind. It's a great line, and it's a great philosophy. If you go through Cat's Cradle, maybe one day I'll do the Cat's Cradle. It too is just chock full of these wisdoms and these wonderful moments. So there you go. So there's got Eliot Rosewater from God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater. Couple of house cleaning things. The Substack was not launched on January 1st like I wanted because, again, several things happened in my personal life that kind of put it on the back burner. But hopefully within the next few weeks, we will be launching the Substack. We've got all kinds of really cool stuff that I'm ready to put up for you. And if you haven't checked it out yet, we've got the first episode of The Optic Poet went up just a couple days ago. Check it out. It's one where Jay and I talk about our first 2 days back for the spring semester and how we're trying to get through that and the wonderful misadventures that we've had so far. And then, of course, the BetaFiles is back and going to try. I don't know how successful I'm going to be, but I'm going to try and keep it lighthearted for a minute, just until we get through the inauguration, because I don't want to go down that rabbit hole and that spiral, right? There are plenty of podcasts and people on YouTube that are already doing wall-to-wall coverage about the insanity of the past few weeks since the first. Excuse me. So check those out. All right. Make it a great day. Be safe, be healthy, and always remember, if the sun comes up, there's opportunity. So take it. I'm the barber. This has been the Beta Files.